A very good morning to all of you. Welcome back to today's analysis session for 12th of July 2023. So let's start with the important topics for today. So Supreme Court asked the ED chief to quit but upholds the amendment. So let's see what are the amendments. So bench says that back-to-back service extensions given to Mishra in 2021, then in 2022 were invalid and they were illegal. So it, however, gave him time till 31st July to leave the office to ensure a smooth transition. So this has been in news before as well. So the Justice V.R. Gavai says that extensions they can be granted by the government only if the committees which are constituted for recommending their appointment, they recommend their extension in the public interest and also record the reasons in writing. So two conditions they need to be met, that if the committees which are there for recommending the names for appointment, they recommend the name for the extension in the public interest, and then secondly they'll also have to record the reasons for the extension. So that is one thing. Then we'll have to go through what are the amendments that has been upheld by the Supreme Court. So CBI and the ED chiefs, they have fixed tenures of 2 years. However, amendments they were introduced in 2021 to the Central Vigilance Commission Act, and then the Delhi Special Police Establishment Act, and the fundamental rules allow them 3 annual extensions. So this was the amendment. And the tweaks in the law, they came shortly after the Supreme Court in a September 2021 judgment. It directed the government to stop giving extensions to Mr. Mishra. So after this Supreme Court judgment, this amendment was done that you can give 3 annual extensions to a person. So amendments, they allowed the government to overcome the court's direction and grant Mr. Mishra another 2 extensions. But in this case, Supreme Court, it has upheld all these amendments which were done by the government, but it has asked the current ED chief to quit, and here the reasoning has also been provided. So specifically in the state of Himachal Pradesh, because of torrential rains, we are seeing massive landslips, which destroyed the buildings, and obviously people have lost their lives, and there is infrastructure destruction which has been caused. So this is from the perspective of disaster management from GS3. This topic is important. You need to look at the bodies which are there and what plans do we have in order to ensure that we are able to handle such type of situation, or do we have any preparedness level beforehand, or given that there are IMD forecasts about the rainfalls. So this needs to be looked into. So Supreme Court says that center's view on Kashmir situation, it has no bearing on Article 370 case. So that is just a view of the central government. So CJ says that the perspective of the union government has no bearing on the issues that have been raised in the petitions and shall not hence be relied upon for that purpose. And this case concerns a pure constitutional challenge. So that would be looked into by the Supreme Court. So we are awaiting the Supreme Court judgment on the same, and then we'll discuss this topic in further detail. So GST Council is going to impose 28% tax on the online gaming firms. So finally, it is decided and it has taken this decision. Apart from this, we'll have to look into what is going to be the reaction of these gaming firms and why 28% levy that has been imposed. That's another thing. And apart from this, the council, it also examined the state's proposals to set up 50 benches of the GST appellate tribunals in the country. So government has said that the statutory bodies to resolve mounting GST disputes shall become operational within 4 to 6 months, with benches coming up in the state capitals and places where the high courts they have their benches. So the council it cleared the appointment and service conditions for the tribunal members and the president. So we'll take up this in further detail. So here in this case, in case of Delhi, we're seeing that the water level in Yamuna it has crossed the safer mark. So over 7,000 people they have been relocated because Yamuna water level touches 10-year high in the city. So this is one of the measures of we can say preparedness level or in order to be safer. So people have been relocated to safer locations and government is working to evacuate 41,000 people who are living close to the river and waterlogging. It has become an annual ritual in the capital. So what needs to be done to address this problem? Coming to the editorial page. So again, this article is very important because it is not just talking about demographic transition, but it is connecting this thing to how it has changed the lives of women. So the passage of the World Population Day, yesterday we discussed this topic, we discussed about the theme and all of that. So India's population, it grew from about 340 million at independence to 1.4 billion currently. And this growth, it was fueled by the gift of life that receding starvation, improved public health conditions, medical miracles that brought to India that improved us and bringing to the current position. So in 1941, male life expectancy, it was about 56 years. Only 50% of the boys they survived to age 28. Today, the life expectancy for men it is 69 years. Nearly 50% they live to see the ripe old age of 75. So this rapid decline in mortality, it took parents by surprise who no longer they needed to have 4 children to ensure that at least two would survive. So this thing was tackled and then fertility rate, it also fell from 5.7 in 1950 to right now 2.1, which is also the replacement rate in 2019. So this statistics, it masks the tectonic shift in the lives of the people as they learn to adjust to a longer lifespan and fewer children. So nowhere is this like more apparent than in the lives of the Indian women. So how this change in terms of increased life expectancy and having fewer children has impacted the lives of Indian women. So women's childhood, adulthood, and the old age have been transformed over the course of demographic transition and sometimes positively also and sometimes negatively. So what are the changes for Indian women? So as families, they began having fewer children, ensuring at least one son, it would became more difficult. So with 4 children, the chance of not having a son, it was barely 6%. So these things cropped up. And the Indian Human Development Survey found that 85% of women respondents, they expected to rely on their sons for the old age support, while only 11% expected support from their daughters. So the parents who want to ensure that they have at least one son among their 1 or 2 child family, they resorted to sex selective abortion. And in some cases, the neglect of sick daughters. So basically, such illegal activities grew with time, and consequently, the number of girls per 100 boys ages under 5 that dropped from 96 to 91 between this time period. So, with the fertility decline, active mothering occupies a smaller proportion of women's lives now, and that creates a space for education and employment for them. And good data on this only goes back 30 years. But the research based on the National Family Health Survey finds that the number of years women they spend caring for children under 5 that declined from 14 years to 8 years. So these changes are only partly accompanied by the changes in the life course of women. So while women's educational attainment that has increased, so this is one of the positive impacts, with over 70% of the girls now enrolling in the secondary education, early marriage and childbearing remain the predominant forces defining women's lives. So that is another change, and early motherhood perhaps explains why lower fertility does not translate into higher labor force participation for women. So this needs to be tackled. Early motherhood is creating problem when we talk about how can we ensure increasing the women's labor force participation rate. So like two things exist. One is early motherhood, then at the same time, lower fertility rate. So lower fertility rate is somewhere we can say creating positive impact on women's life, but early motherhood is barring them and preventing them from entering into the labor force. So women, they need to establish secure connections to the labor market and gain work experience if they are to get skilled jobs. So then for this, obviously they need to give up on early motherhood. They need to go for family planning, and by the time the peak childcare demands that ends, they have missed the window for occupations that require specific skills, and only unskilled work is open to them. And then talking about the impacts because of this demographic shift at the old age. So with rising life expectancy, the proportion of the female population aged 65 and above has increased from 5% to 11%. So it is more than doubled, and it is projected to reach 21% by 2050. So while proportion of older men will also increase, so aging for women, it has unique implications. So let's understand what are those unique implications for old age women. So women generally, they marry men who are older to them and are more likely to outlive their husbands. So that's one thing. In 2011 census, it shows that while only 18% of the men above 65, they are widowed, and about 55% of the women, they are widowed above 65. So for the widowed women, they lack access to savings and property that results in dependence on their children. So that is one of the negative fallouts. And obviously, mainly they depend upon their sons, bringing the vicious cycle of the son preference to the full circle. Now, talking about harnessing the gender dividend. So, changing patriarchal norms that may take a longer time. So, meanwhile, enhancing women's access to employment and assets that will reduce their reliance on the son, and it could break this vicious cycle of gendered disadvantage stretching from childhood to old age. So we need to ensure that they get access to employment. For that, they need to be skilled, and for that, we need to ensure that early motherhood, or they are basically made more aware about the implications of that. And secondly, they need to have access to the assets so as to reduce their dependence upon their son child. So what are the practical strategies for enhancing the childcare access? One relatively low-hanging fruit would be to make staffing the crèche an acceptable form of work under the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. And then at present, the NREGs there's being used to build physical infrastructure, but there is no reason that it cannot be used to develop the social infrastructure where NREGs, their workers, they can help the staff crèches also. So right now their contribution is only restricted to physical infrastructure, but we can basically exploit their potential even in building of the social infrastructure as well. Then the burgeoning self-help group movement that can be harnessed to set up the neighborhood child care centers in the urban and rural areas. So obtaining the much hoped for demographic dividend that cannot be done without fully harnessing the gender dividend. So when we talk about demographic dividend, so you can bring in this aspect of gender dividend as well in your answers. So improving access to child care is an important component of achieving this. So basically that needs to be assimilated in the professional work culture. Then coming to this term of greenwashing, firstly, you need to be clear with its meaning. That is the first and the foremost thing. Going forward, the changes to the conservation laws must be backed by scientific evidence. So the Forest Conservation Amendment Bill 2023 that is being deliberated upon by the Joint Committee of Parliament is contentious piece of legislation that signals the complex challenges which are involved in balancing the industrial development and the conservation of forest. So basically here the dilemma is between growth versus development. So you need to balance the interest of the industries, and at the same time you need to ensure that the environment, or we are not basically creating any disturbance or disbalance in the environment. So environment conservation and industrial development. So while industrialization inevitably means usurping the greater tracts of forest land and ecosystems, so Forest Conservation Act of 1980, that has been the mantelpiece legislation that has empowered the state to regulate this and impose costs on such industrial exploitation. So here we are having one Supreme Court judgment in the case of T.N. Godvarman case of 1996. Among other things, it broadened the scope of such protection to even those not officially classified as the forest areas. So India's forest cover, it has seen only marginal increases, as that's like an we get to know it from the biennial reports of the Forest Survey of India. But the growth in the forest cover inside the officially recorded forest, that remains stagnant, or it is like at best incremental only. So it is the tree cover in the orchards, plantations, and the village homesteads that has been on the rise and supplementing the India's claim that 24% of its area is under the forest and the tree cover. So basically, here also you need to understand and you need to be clear with what has been the changing trend, because such types of questions, they are asked in prelims. So India has committed to increasing this number to 33% and adding carbon sink of 2.5 billion to 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide this way by 2030. That is the target year. So basically, when we talk about the recent amendments done in this act, we see that the amendments, they do not really contribute to regenerating the natural forest, but rather incentivize afforestation for the commercial ends. So what is worrying is that the parliamentary committee, despite its statutory privileges, it has not expressed any opinion or suggestion on the way forward. And grooming the private forest might look good in theory, but expecting them to be a permanent carbon stock is wishful thinking, given that strong market incentives they exist to use them as the carbon credits. So North India's monsoon mayhem, and this topic is very important from the perspective of disaster management. So why was the rainfall this pre-monsoon season above normal? Is the global warming the only factor which is influencing the unpredictable monsoon? Then how did the warming of Atlantic Ocean and the Himalayas that affect the patchy distribution of rainfall this monsoon? So this is the most important question. So here, let's understand different nuances and understand this topic with clarity. So every year, the entire country awaits the onset and evolution of the monsoon. So from the perspective of geography, the basic concepts and the terms, that is one critical area. Apart from this, here we're talking in the context of the influence in the monsoon in terms of how the warming of Atlantic Ocean and Himalayas that has affected this distribution of rainfall. So did the climate change influence this monsoon or not? So the impact of climate change, it has always been of great interest, but it is worth remembering that everything today, it happens in a warmer world that is also more humid. So with the global warming, a warm and humid atmosphere acts like a steroid for the weather. So every weather event, now it has some contribution from the global warming, and at the same time, one must also pay close attention to weather patterns that emerge due to other factors also. So while we talk about El Nino, it has been grabbing many headlines this year, but it's not yet clear how much the current monsoon mayhem it has had to do with the El Nino thing. Then we talk about wildfires, that also this year it is burned over 3 times the normal area and have also emitted about 3 times as much carbon dioxide. So this also had a contribution to the warming thing. And what are the other factors? which have contributed to warming. So Indian subcontinent is like a popcorn kettle that gets heated up as the sun crosses over into the northern hemisphere in the March. And rainfall is like the kernels of the corn which is popping randomly around the kettle. So that is monsoon rainfall distribution always tends to be patchy. So excess rainfall of the northwest India, it is consistent with the Arabian Sea having warmed by about 1.5 degrees Celsius. And this was expected according to a study also, which was conducted last year. So June contributes only about 15% of rainfall to the seasonal total. And instabilities in the atmosphere that drive the convection, they are not strong enough to drive the large scale rainfall during the pre-monsoon season. So the mystery is that despite averaging rainfall over a month, a season, or even multiple seasons, rainfall distribution remains uneven. So disuniform terrain and heterogeneous land use patterns are the likely culprits behind this thing. So Atlantic Ocean and the upper atmospheric circulation, they also tinker with the monsoon. And the entire Atlantic Ocean has been warmer than the normal since March, while the so-called Atlantic Nino, with the warmer tropical Atlantic generally tends to suppress the monsoon rainfall. And it is not clear what the impacts are when the entire Atlantic is as warm as it has been this year. So those results were not clear with them absolutely. So this is one new emerging area which is impacting monsoon, and the strongest winds that occur in the upper atmosphere, they can spontaneously break into the clockwise and anti-clockwise pattern, especially when they run into mountainous terrain such as the Himalaya. So strong clockwise winds with the air flowing out from the center in the upper atmosphere, they demand an anti-clockwise circulation near the surface in order to feed the upper level outflow. So such a convergence near the surface, it can drive excess rainfall. And then talking about warming over the Himalayas, it has not been uniform either. So some parts of the mountain chain, they're amplifying the global warming, leading to rapid local warming. So irregular weather patterns during the monsoon superpose on these local features as a result of the winds expanding or compressing as they race up and down the narrow valley. So results can be cloudburst, heavy rains, torrential rains, or even heat waves, depending on the local flow patterns. So such disparate weather patterns, they can occur side by side as well. So that is the emerging challenge, to be very specific in the context of the impacts of warming climate. So what next? So conclusion is that the Indian subcontinent is a veritable popcorn kettle that can throw up many surprises in coming times, and everything is not directly attributable to global warming. So only improved forecast with sufficient granularity in space and time can reduce the element of surprise resulting from these weather monsters. So we need to be best prepared to handle such type of situation, and herein the role of IMD becomes extremely important. So this is a repeated topic, the issue between the farmers and the PepsiCo. You can go through this article once if you don't know what is the entire issue. So the president lays stress on the constitutional ideals. So here, the two-day visitors conference hosted by the Prime Minister Draupadi Murmu and visitors of nearly 160 centrally sponsored educational institutions, they've discussed diversity, equality, inclusivity, and wellness in the higher education institutions in the country. So you can note down all these keywords. And apart from this, she said that institutions of higher education, they were among the most effective platforms for promoting the constitutional ideals of justice, equality, fraternity, individual dignity, and respect for women. So this needs to be carried forward. Then one more cheetah from the Africa dies in the Kuno Park. So again, raising questions over whether basically their adaptability to the Indian climate, and is it these, we can say, can it be called a sustainable measure of reviving back the cheetah population in the Indian subcontinent or not? So 415 million Indians, they came out of the multidimensional poverty in 15 years as per the UNDP study. So firstly, you need to be clear with the idea of multidimensional poverty. And then there's one index which is also calculated for this. What are the indicators used? And then this data becomes important. So the report said that 25 countries, including India, they have halved their global MPI values within 15 years. So that's an achievement. And here we have the numbers, the time period between 2005 to 2019. And this is the index, which is released by the United Nations Development Program and the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative at the University of Oxford. So they released this index. So the report noted that deprivation in all indicators declined in India, and the poorest states in the groups, including children and people in disadvantaged caste groups, they had fastest absolute progress that was witnessed. So that is a critical improvement. So here in multidimensional poverty index, it is not just restricted to how much are you earning. It is from the from the angle of whether you have the access to potable water or not, whether you have basically access to pakka houses, access to educational facilities, to healthcare facilities. So likewise, and to be precise, you can find out about exactly what indicators are used in calculation for this index. So Azerbaijan closes the vital road link to breakaway region of Karabakh. So this you need to keep in mind that Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is in the context of Azerbaijan, and it temporarily shut the only road linkage, its breakaway Nagorno-Karabakh region with Armenia. So the conflict is between Azerbaijan and Armenia. So even the name of the region can come up in the examination. So India seeks transformation in ties with Sri Lanka. So firstly, you need to know about how has been our ties with Sri Lanka from the history. Definitely, when we talk about spread of Buddhism, so we are having, or we can say our cultures are somewhere linked together. But of late, India is seeking a positive transformation in its ties with Sri Lanka. We know about the political and the economic crisis which is going on in the country, role of China, and that's why we are aiming at some positive transformation between the relations. And discussions earlier today with the Sri Lankan leadership, as also with the foreign ministry, they were essentially focused on trying to ensure that the upcoming visit of the president of Sri Lanka is actually a point of positive transformation in the relationship. So Sri Lanka is currently negotiating a debt treatment plan with its external creditors, including India, China, and Japan. And Sri Lankan authorities, they have underscored the importance of Indian tourists and investment for the country's economic recovery. So we are basically focusing upon the revival of the key areas. So India was also Sri Lanka's first bilateral creditor to offer written financial assurances to Sri Lanka. The protests erupt as the European Union bill to protect the nature goes to vote. So what is the protest actually about? So basically, the bill's objective is to protect the threatened nature and shielding it from disruptive environmental change. So you can know these keywords: disruptive environmental change. And spurred on by the climate activist Greta Thunberg, demonstrators they have demanded that the European Union pushes through a bill to beef up the restoration of nature in the 27 nation bloc that was damaged during decades of industrial expansion. So, a counter demonstration, the farmers demanded a slower approach that would lessen the impact on their income as well. On the business page, where we see Supreme Court, it has asked SEBI, why was the law altered to jettison the norm barring opacity of the FPI ownership? So yesterday also we discussed this topic. So SG Mehta asserts SEBI probe going on at full speed. Petitioners advocate says that SEBI's change of the FPI law in 2018 is absolutely fatal to its investigation. So the law was amended in between, and SEBI feels that it was made much more stricter in nature, so as to easily disclose the identity of the FPI investors. But here, when SEBI was carrying out the investigation for this Hindenburg report in the Adani case, so herein this issue it cropped up and came to the forefront. So Supreme Court has asked SEBI to explain why this legal provisions that prohibited the opacity in the ownership structure of the FPIs, why were that dropped? So Supreme Court's expert panel noted that provision on the opaque structure requiring an FPI to disclose every ultimate beneficiary that was junked in 2018. So what was the circumstances under which you had to change the provisions dealing with the opaque structure? And amendments may prevent SEBI from exploring the layers of transactions. So in a way, it is pointing towards reduced transparency and promoting more autonomous identity of the FPIs. But ultimately, they are having an impact on Indian economy because they are making such huge amount of investments, and FPI, as we say, is the hot money, so they can exit the Indian market easily as well. So gaming industry reacts with shock to GST on the deposits. So this is a recent announcement by the GST Council that the gaming industry it would have to pay 28% of the tax. The real money gaming industry, where the players they can risk money for winnings, they denounced the GST Council's decision uh, to tax the players' entire deposits as opposed to the commission charged by the firms. So they're calling the decision to be unconstitutional and irrational. So Schedule M is going to be mandatory for the MSME pharma firms very soon. So here the Union Minister of Chemicals and Fertilizers has directed the regulatory authorities to conduct the risk-based inspection and audit manufacturing plants with a view to ensuring the robust quality of pharmaceutical products. So he also stated that Schedule M, it would be made compulsory for the MSME pharma sector, and this will help in quality assurance and also reduce the compliance burden. So Schedule M, it's a part of the Drugs and Cosmetics Act, and it deals with good manufacturing practices for the pharmaceuticals that should be followed by the manufacturers. So of late, we have seen incidences which raise questions over the quality of drugs which India is exporting. So in that context, here we have this news. So you need to remember, or you can think about what can be part of the good manufacturing practices as far as the pharmaceutical industries are concerned. Coming to the Mint newspaper, so here we see on the economy page, railways it plans rupees 1 trillion signal system recast. So again, regarding the apprehensions about the safety of the railway travel. So here, basically, this is a step in that Directions of fully electronic system to slash the maintenance and avert the tampering. So signaling systems along India's sprawling rail network, they will turn fully electronic over the next 6 years as part of this plan to avoid the kind of errors that led to the Balasore rail tragedy in June. And mission mode program will replace the existing electromechanical system that we have with the solid state electronic route relay devices. So as to reduce the chances of human error and the signaling failures. So it would be basically changed into a purely electronic system. So India's 70,000 kilometer of rail network, it has close to 8,000 stations or somewhere 7 lakh to 8 lakh signaling points. And the actual work, it may take longer than the planned 6 years, since Indian Railways, it is also expanding its network at the same time, and additional work may be required on the new lines. So it will need multiple checks before introduction and creation of fresh standard operating procedures to maintain smooth and safe train movement. So we need a foolproof and fail-proof system so as to ensure the safety of travelers. Coming to Financial Express newspaper, so let's see the important topics here. So we've talked about the tax on e-gaming industry, 28% with the tax that would be levied on their turnover. And this would be applicable in case of casinos as well. So basically targeting the money gaming apps. And 22% cess would be levied on MUVs and XUVs, similar to SUVs. So here the gaming firms, they fear the shutdown of the business because of this move. Then another update about that, Tata is said to be the first Indian entity to make iPhones. So domestically, they will be manufactured in India. The facility, it will be employing more than 10,000 workers who assemble the latest iPhone 14 model. So Western plant deal expected by the August end. Then, so inspection of the Baiju's account books has been ordered by MCA. So the MCA is sort of a report on the finances and accounting practices in the 6 weeks. Baiju says that it has not yet received any communication from the MCA, and the inspection follows an internal assessment of the company's state of affairs. So based on the report findings, the government will decide if the matter needs to be escalated to SFIU or not. So SFIU is the Serious Fraud Investigation Office. So there exists great divide in the FMCG, that is the fast moving consumer goods. So some firms, they're cutting the prices, others, they look at the increase. So all are basically aimed at increasing the profits. So if they reduce their prices, obviously they would be attracting more consumers. And ultimately that's like very direct and logical that if you increase the prices, of course, profits also go up. But at the same time, you need to sustain that scale. So utility vehicles, they have been redefined by the GST Council. So parameters includes the length of the vehicle should exceed 4 meters, engine capacity of 1500 cc, and ground clearance of 170 mm and above in the unladen form. That's something technical. Then in the senior citizen savings scheme, receipts have increased by 176% in Q1, and center may increase the reliance on it to finance the fiscal deficit. So here again, you can just find out the basic trend, how it has been changing. So standards will be notified for the lighters and water bottles. So this is basically aimed at curbing the imports. So to curb the imports and encourage local manufacturing, government has notified the quality control orders for the flame lighteners and lighters and the portable water bottles. Apart from the standards, they will be applicable on both the domestic manufacturers and the imports as well. Then, so the import of the lighters costing below rupees 20 a piece, that has been prohibited, and most commonly used flame lighters from cigarettes, they are imported at the cost of rupees 3 to 4 a piece and retail of rupees 10 to 20. And for the portable water bottles, you need to be having compulsory certification under the appropriate IS standard for the production and import of the portable water bottles made of copper, stainless steel, or aluminium. So you can search about it a little more and find out about exactly what are the quality standards that have been ordered. So again, reiteration is the same thing, that extension of the ED chief's tenure, that it's invalid and he must go according to the Supreme Court. So the Union Home Minister says that those rejoicing over the Supreme Court decision, the ED case, are delusional for various reasons, and powers of the ED to strike at those who are corrupt and on the wrong side of the law remains the same. So it is just about the ED chief and no change. And then we also talked about that the amendments that were done by the government, even that has been upheld by the Supreme Court. India looks to liquefy the gas Iraq flares and import. So Gulf nation wastes 70% of its natural gas. And a few days back, we were talking about developing India as a natural gas-based economy. So country depends on import to meet half of its requirement, even in case of the natural gas. So gas flaring, it has been an issue with Iraq. Here you can see the picture, and the country wants to end the burning of associated gas in the oil fields to cut down the losses and reduce the gas imports. So Iraq, it burns 70% of the natural gas produced in its oil fields as a waste product. So that can be harnessed instead of wasting it through this method. So as per a World Bank estimate, Iraq flares about 16 billion cubic meters of gas per day. So workers' plight taking the polish off the India's diamond city. So talking about the diamond workers in Gujarat. So the Surat Diamond Workers Union, they claim that more than 20,000 workers in the industry, they have lost their jobs. So you can understand this whole issue as a case study. And then they are forced to avail the unpaid summer break of 20 to 25 days. This has become an additional burden on them, and reduced weekly work hours have impacted the salaries also, and that's how they've been impacted. So Surat, which is situated on the banks of Tapi River, is known as India's diamond city, as it processes around 80% to 90% of the world's diamonds. But it has been in news for some wrong reasons. So over the past few weeks, Surat, it has registered 9 cases of suicide. All of the workers they've engaged in the diamond industry, they have attempted suicide. Apart from this, the unfortunate saga started a month ago when a diamond worker aged 55, his wife, and 2 adult children, they died after they reportedly consumed a poisonous substance due to financial distress. So basically, as a DM, what steps are you going to ensure that society is not committed? What are going to be the steps that you're going to take in order to ensure their welfare and their economic recovery and maintain their financial viability as well? So here again, the problem of migrants also comes in. Their role is also important. So we see nearly 90% of the diamond workers, they are migrants from Gujarat's Saurashtra region. So it is within the state. So Surat Diamond Workers Union, they claims that more than 20,000 workers in the industry, they have lost their jobs. So how are you, basically the people who have lost their jobs, how can they find, or how, as you as a DM, you will be able to ensuring them, you'll be able to make sure that they get job somewhere else. So this is one of the case studies. Coming to Indian Express newspaper. So police charge sheet says that photos show him making advances. CDRs match the location in testimony. So Delhi police case on the sexual harassment of the women wrestlers by Brij Bhushan Singh. So, but no visitor register or CCTV at WFI office, site of at least 2 alleged incidents. So these are the updates regarding this case. So slew of pacts and strategy to students, 25-year plan as Prime Minister, he heads to Paris. So he's on a visit to France. So 25-year vision statement for India-France bilateral ties. And apart from this, um, we expect outcomes on areas like defense, space, geostrategy, infrastructure, energy, climate change, likewise. So these are going to be the focus area, and statements are expected on Indo-Pacific as well as the on the strategic pillar as well. So National Security Advisor says that terror is not linked to any religion. We need to take on the extremes. So basically, you need to look at things in an objective manner. You can't relate it to any religion. Basically, there's no linkage between terrorism and any religion. So NSA, he said that terrorism is not linked to any religion, and that it is the duty of the spiritual and the religious leaders to counter anyone who takes the path of violence. So basically, these spiritual and religious leaders, they can play an important role in preventing such acts, but at the same time, you can't say that terrorism is related to any religion. So it is not linked to any religion. It is the individuals that get misguided, and it's probably the duty of the spiritual and the religious leaders to see that they can belong to any religion, faith, belief, political ideology, but anyone who takes the path of violence will have to be countered as effectively. Coming to the explained page, so here, Moon's south pole is under target. So why Chandrayaan 3 will go where no craft has gone so far. So why in the past no spacecraft it ever targeted a landing near the lunar south pole? So what are the challenges associated with it? So here we see that the terrain and temperature, they are more hospitable and conducive for the long and sustained operations of the instruments on board. Surface in this region is even and smooth, and very steep slopes, they're almost absent, and there are fewer hills or craters. There is abundant sunlight, at least on the side facing the Earth. And the polar regions of the moons, there are a very different and difficult terrains. So this was about the equator of the moon. Here, when we talk about the polar regions of the moon, so they are very different and they're difficult terrains. So many areas which are close to the lunar poles, they lie in completely dark region where even sunlight never reaches. So temperature, it can fall to below minus 230 degrees Celsius. And the absence of sunlight and the extremely low temperature makes it difficult to operate instruments in the polar regions of the moon. So the lunar surface here, it is littered with deep craters of sizes ranging from a few centimeters to several thousand kilometers. But the question is, why does India want to explore this lunar South Pole? So in the past, several orbiter missions, they have provided evidence that these regions, they could hold several interesting secrets. So that is one of the main and the important reasons. And there are indications that ice molecules, they are also present in substantial amounts in some of the deep craters. So also the extremely cold temperatures in this region mean that anything which is trapped here is likely to remain frozen in time without undergoing much change. So that would be also giving us critical insights about the formation of the universe. So why is Turkey opposing the Sweden's bid to join the NATO alliance? So here we see the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says Turkey could not welcome the Nordic nations as NATO allies unless they crack down on the groups that the Ankara views as a security threats, including the banned Kurdistan Workers' Party, which has led a decades-long insurgency in Turkey. So that is why basically Turkey is opposing the inclusion of Sweden into NATO. Then not enough rain in the pulses heartland, then again it could lead to food inflation, specifically inflation in the prices of the pulses. And one of the varieties is arhar, which could face the heat this time. So when we talk about all the pulses, you need to know about how much quantity are we actually importing, and you need to compare it with other imports as well. So you need to have this clarity. Apart from this, the basic things that which states they account for the maximum amount of pulses cultivation, and basically what kind of climate is required for their cultivation. Then South Korea's SK Hynix, it's looking to set up the chip packaging plant in India. So we are talking about the developments around the semiconductors production domestically, semiconductor chips production. So chip major in the final stages of preparing its proposal. So India explores the liquefaction units in Iraq to convert the flared gas into LNG. So we've discussed this topic already. We can go through it once quickly. Apart from this, so SEBI says that over 13,000 enforcement actions taken on the illegal illiquid stock options trade in the 2 years. Illegal and illiquid stock options trade. So options are basically a form of derivative instruments. We have futures and options. You need to have just clarity about how they are different and how do they operate. So on track for the pan-India rollout of the ethanol 20 petrol by 2025. So that's all for today. Thank you so much for joining us. And I hope the topics are clearer to you. So that's all for today. And do subscribe to our channel if you haven't, and hit the like button for the video.